My life was completely normal. Until a stranger's words irrevocably changed everything. This isn't just a story. It's the terrifying, true account of how a fortune-teller's prophecy began to unfold, pulling me into a whirlwind of unforeseen events. And you won't believe what happened next, as her warning became my inescapable truth. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday. Gray sky, cold drizzle. The kind of day where everything feels slightly heavier than it should. I remember sitting in my car outside the old market on Maple Street, watching raindrops snake down the windshield. My plan was simple. Grab a coffee, pick up a few groceries, and get back to my quiet apartment before the rain got worse. But that's the thing about ordinary. It only takes one decision, one curious glance, to turn it into something you never forget. Across the street, tucked between a pawnshop and a florist, was a small sign I'd never noticed before. It read, in crooked gold letters, Madame Estelle, Fortune Readings, Palm and Spirit. I almost laughed. That kind of thing wasn't me. I was logical, grounded. I didn't believe in crystals or prophecies or whatever else lived in that world. But something about the way that sign swayed in the wind, it drew me. Maybe it was the eerie quiet of the day. Maybe I was just lonely and curious enough to step out of routine for once. So I crossed the street. The bell above the door chimed softly as I entered. The air smelled of incense and something faintly metallic, like old coins. A single red lamp cast shadows across the walls, where silk scarves hung like ghosts. "Come in, child," a voice said from behind a beaded curtain. It was low, raspy, and strangely calm. I hesitated, brushing rain off my coat. I wasn't planning to, really. I just saw your sign. The beads parted, and there she was, Madame Estelle. She wasn't the mystical type I'd pictured. No shimmering robes or glittering jewelry. Just an older woman with silver hair pulled into a braid, dark eyes that looked through me instead of at me, and hands that trembled slightly as she motioned to a chair. "Sit," she said softly. "You don't need to believe for the truth to find you." I wanted to smile, make a joke, brush it off. But her tone, it wasn't playful. It was final. So I sat. The room was silent except for the ticking of a small clock somewhere behind me. Estelle reached for my hands, her skin cool and dry against mine, and studied my palms. At first, nothing. Just her eyes darting back and forth, her lips pressed in a thin line. Then she inhaled sharply. "Your path," she murmured, "is about to split." I frowned. "Split? What does that mean?" "You'll face a crossroads," she said slowly. "One choice will promise comfort, but hide decay. The other will hurt, but lead you to truth. You must choose wisely, or you will lose what you cannot replace." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "I don't understand," I said. "You're saying I'm going to have to, make some big decision?" She didn't answer, her gaze fixed on something behind me, as if she saw a shape I couldn't. Then she whispered, almost trembling, "The storm comes sooner than you think." A flash of lightning cracked outside, and for a second, the room plunged into darkness. When the light flickered back on, she was staring at me with eyes wide and wet. "Leave," she said suddenly. "Go now, and when the choice appears, remember my words." I laughed nervously, trying to shake it off. "Okay, this is... Look, thanks for the warning, Madame Estelle, but I think I'll take my chances." I stood, fumbling for my bag, and slipped out as the bell jingled again. The rain had stopped, but the air felt thick, like the moment before another storm. As I walked back to my car, I tried to laugh it off. Who even talks like that? The path will split. Comfort and decay. It was poetic nonsense, right? And yet, somewhere deep in my chest, a weight settled. a tiny gnawing unease that followed me home. That night, as I sat on the couch scrolling through work emails, I found myself replaying her words. "You will lose what you cannot replace." I turned off the phone, trying to quiet my thoughts. But even as I drifted off to sleep, I swear I heard her voice again, soft and urgent, echoing in my head. The storm comes sooner than you think, and, in the silence of that dim apartment, I realized I wasn't laughing anymore. The next few days passed, almost too normally. Work, emails, commutes, the small hum of everyday life. I told myself Madame Estelle's words were just a show, a trick of suggestion, that thing where your brain looks for patterns that don't exist. Still, the memory clung like smoke. Every time I poured coffee or glanced at my phone, I'd hear her voice in the back of my mind. One choice will promise comfort, but hide decay. The other will hurt, but lead to truth. I brushed it off, until things started shifting. It began small. A meeting at work that got moved, then moved again. Emails I knew I'd sent suddenly vanishing from my sent folder. A familiar song playing in 3 different places in one day. My car, a cafe, and a stranger's ringtone. It was like the universe was tapping on my shoulder, whispering, "Pay attention." Then came the message. My phone buzzed just as I was locking up for the night. Unknown number. No name. Just, "You're being considered for a senior position. Call me tomorrow morning." I blinked at the screen. I hadn't applied for anything. The next morning I called, half out of curiosity, half out of disbelief. And sure enough, it was real. The company's regional director said my work had come up in conversation, and they wanted me to interview for a project lead role. Double my current salary. It sounded perfect. Almost too perfect. When I told my friend Claire, she grinned. "See? Maybe the fortune teller wasn't warning you. Maybe she was predicting this." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But Estelle's words gnawed at me. Comfort that hides decay. Still, logic won. I went to the interview. It was held in a sleek office tower downtown, the kind with glass walls that reflect the sky. The air smelled of coffee and ambition. The hiring manager smiled too much. He spoke in polished phrases about vision and growth. I nodded and smiled back, trying to ignore the faint headache pressing behind my eyes. Halfway through, my phone buzzed again. Just once. When I glanced down, the screen lit up with an unsaved number. A single text. "Don't choose comfort." My breath caught. The hiring manager was still talking. "So, how soon do you think you could transition into the new role?" I mumbled something about needing a few days to consider, my voice sounding far away. Afterward, I stood in the elevator, staring at my reflection in the mirrored doors. My own face looked unfamiliar. Pale, strained, older somehow. Who sent that message? How would they even know what I was doing? When the elevator doors opened, I stepped out into the cold, damp air and felt the first tremor of fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my phone, scrolling through contacts, trying to trace that number. Nothing. I told myself it was a prank, a coincidence. Anything but what it really felt like. A warning. Over the next week, the coincidences grew sharper. I spilled water on my desk, and the droplets formed a shape that looked like a Y, like a forked path. A man on the subway said into his phone, "It's either comfort or truth, you can't have both." And one morning, as I unlocked my door, I found an envelope on my doormat. No name. No address. Inside was a single Polaroid, a picture of me, sitting in the fortune teller's chair. My heart dropped. Who took it? I hadn't seen anyone else in that room. I rushed inside, locked the door, and sat on the floor with my back against it, clutching that photo like it was something poisonous. Everything in me wanted to burn it, forget it, erase it. But instead, I slid it into the drawer beside my bed, because some part of me needed proof that this was really happening. 2 days later, my boss called. The job offer had come through. It was mine, if I wanted it. He was almost giddy when he said, "You'd be crazy to turn this down. It's the opportunity people wait their whole careers for." And yet, as I hung up the phone, I felt nothing but dread. Was this the crossroads Estelle warned about? Was this the choice, comfort or truth? I looked around my apartment, the steady hum of my old fridge, the framed photo of my late mother on the wall, the warm light spilling across the floor. Everything suddenly felt temporary, fragile. I whispered into the stillness, "What happens if I choose wrong?" And from somewhere deep in memory, like a whisper riding the wind, came her voice again. "You will lose what you cannot replace." I didn't know it then, but that decision, the one I made the next morning, would set off a chain of events that would change everything. Forever. I said yes. The next morning, I accepted the job. My voice didn't even sound like my own when I said it. Confident, steady, certain. But inside, I was anything but. The fortune teller's warning echoed at the edges of my thoughts. Still, I told myself I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe I was in control, that my choices were my own. For a while, everything looked perfect. New office, new paycheck, a view of the city skyline that shimmered at dusk. People congratulated me. My parents would have been proud, if they were still here. But it didn't take long for the shine to fade. The first problem was subtle, like a crack beneath paint. The project I'd been assigned was chaotic. Files missing, deadlines impossible, staff quitting without notice. Every morning started with caffeine and ended with quiet panic. Then, the second problem hit. Someone was leaking internal reports, sending sensitive data to a rival company, and somehow, every trace pointed to me. I remember sitting in my office, lights low, staring at my inbox as a new email arrived from my director. Subject line, urgent. Meet me in 10. My stomach dropped. When I walked into his office, he didn't look up. Just held out a folder. Inside were screenshots, emails supposedly sent from my account, except I never wrote them. He finally looked at me and said, "I'm giving you a chance to explain before this goes higher." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Explain what? That I was being haunted by a prophecy? That a stranger's warning might somehow be bleeding into my reality? He dismissed me with a tight smile. "We'll sort it out, but keep your head down." That night, I walked home instead of taking the subway. The streets were slick with rain, neon lights bending across puddles. Each reflection looked warped, like the city itself was tilting. Halfway home, I passed a small alley I'd never noticed before, and there, leaning against the brick wall, was a man I'd never seen, but somehow recognized. Tall gray coat, hat pulled low. He didn't move, didn't speak, just lifted a hand and pointed at me. A single word hissed from his lips, barely audible through the rain. Choice. I froze. What? But when I blinked, he was gone. The alley was empty. Only the echo of that word remained, bouncing through my skull. Choice. Over the next few weeks, everything unraveled faster. The company launched an internal investigation. Colleagues I used to laugh with now avoided eye contact. I stopped sleeping. Coffee and anxiety became my diet. And yet, there were strange moments of clarity, small, luminous breaks in the fog. A woman in the elevator who looked at me and said, "You're stronger than you think." A file left on my desk anonymously, proving the leaks had come from someone else, and a handwritten note inside that file. Pain leads to truth. I knew that handwriting, Madame Estelle's. I started searching for her again. Her shop on Maple Street was gone, replaced by an empty storefront. Dust on the windows, no trace of her anywhere. I asked the florist next door, an old man with tired eyes. He said, "That place? Closed years ago?" Years. But I'd been there only a month ago. I left shaking. My breath fogged in the air as I walked away, clutching the note like a lifeline. Was I losing my mind? Or was I finally seeing what was real? Days blurred. Then one morning, it happened. My boss called me in, again. Except this time, his tone was different. Cold. Final. He said the company had decided to let me go. No proof. Just suspicion. I packed my desk in silence, hands trembling, coworkers whispering behind me. The world outside looked blurry through the glass, rain streaking down like tears. When I reached the street, I felt hollow. Everything I'd worked for. Gone. All because of a choice I didn't understand. I wandered aimlessly, until I found myself standing by the river, the one that cuts through the city. The water churned under the bridge, dark and relentless. And that's when I saw her. A woman standing by the railing, face hidden by a hood, something about her posture, still, deliberate, made my pulse quicken. I stepped closer. She turned, Madame Estelle. Her eyes were tired now, softer somehow. "You took the wrong path," she said quietly, "but not for long." "I lost everything," I said, my voice breaking. "You told me I'd have to choose, but you didn't tell me what for." She smiled sadly. "You weren't meant to avoid pain, child. You were meant to see through it." Before I could say another word, she turned, walked into the mist and vanished. I ran forward, calling after her, but there was only air. Only the sound of water and my own heartbeat. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept, not peacefully, but deeply. Because deep down, I knew something was ending, and something else, something far stranger, was about to begin. Morning came slowly, gray light leaking through the blinds, silence pressing against the walls. I woke with the faint memory of rain, though the world outside was bone dry. For a long time, I just lay there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, and wondering if I'd finally lost my mind. I'd seen her. I knew I had Madame Estelle, by the river. But when I went back later that day, there was no sign of her, no footprints, no witnesses, just the same cold water, moving endlessly downstream. The days after losing my job blurred together like smeared ink. I moved through them quietly, almost weightless. It's strange how quickly identity can vanish once the title does. No meetings. No structure. No one expecting you to show up. But underneath the numbness, something began to shift. It started with a notebook. I found it wedged in the back of my kitchen drawer while cleaning. A small leather-bound book I didn't remember buying. When I opened it, the first page held a single handwritten line. "Truth lives where comfort dies." My breath caught, the handwriting. Hers again. The next few pages were blank, except for faint indentations, like someone had written there and torn out the paper. But if I tilted it to the light, I could make out fragments of words pressed into the grain. Loss. Choice. Awakening. I didn't know what to make of it, but it felt intentional, as if she'd left it for me to find only when I was ready. And that's when I realized something. All along, I'd been reacting, running from fear, fighting, to avoid what she'd warned me about. Instead of asking what it was meant to teach me. Maybe this wasn't a curse, maybe it was a mirror. I started walking every evening. No destination. Just moving, it cleared my head. One night, I stopped by a small cafe I used to visit after work, and ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. Daniel, an old coworker, the kind who listens more than he talks. We caught up for a while, laughing about old projects, old mistakes. When I told him what had happened, the layoffs, the false accusations, he frowned. That company was corrupt, you know. People were disappearing from payroll long before you joined. You didn't lose stability. You escaped it. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. I'd been mourning something rotten, calling it comfort when it had been slowly eating away at me. And I remembered Estelle's words. One choice will promise comfort but hide decay. The other will hurt, but lead you to truth. It finally made sense. I hadn't been punished. I'd been freed. The next morning, I woke early, before dawn. For the first time in months, I didn't feel dread when I opened my eyes. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and stared at the blank document waiting for me. I'd always loved to write. Quietly, secretly, but never had the time. Now I had nothing but time. So I began. At first, it was just fragments, thoughts, memories. But as the sun rose, sentences began to form, stories about choices, about loss, about finding strength in endings. By evening, I realized I'd written for 10 straight hours without noticing. Something inside me had shifted from panic to purpose. Weeks passed. I started publishing short essays online, then longer pieces. People read them. People connected with them. They wrote to me, saying my words felt like something they'd been afraid to admit out loud. It was healing. Not just for them, but for me. I wasn't who I used to be, and for the first time, I didn't want to be. Then one day, while walking home from the cafe, I saw a familiar glint of red in a store window, a small lamp, the same shade, the same carved base I remembered from that first visit to Estelle's shop. I stepped closer. Inside, a woman sat behind a table, young, serene, arranging cards. Above her, a sign, Estelle and Daughters, readings by appointment. My heart stopped. I walked in slowly. The young woman looked up and smiled. Can I help you? I hesitated. Is Estelle here? The woman's smile softened. She was my mother, she said quietly. She passed away 5 years ago. The room tilted. That's not possible. But she nodded before I could finish. She touched many lives, she said. Sometimes people still feel her near. She always said she'd keep guiding those who weren't done learning. I didn't know what to say. Tears stung my eyes before I even felt them fall. She handed me a card, handwritten in looping script. Mom left a message for anyone who asked for her, she said. The card read, "The storm was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to wash you clean." I stood there for a long moment, unable to breathe. Outside, the sky had begun to clear. A quiet light spilled across the street, soft and forgiving. For the first time, I understood. Her prophecy hadn't been about fear. It had been about transformation. I left the shop that day lighter than I'd felt in years. The world looked sharper, colors truer, air sweeter. And as I walked home under the fading light, I whispered to myself, not in fear this time, but in gratitude. The storm comes sooner than you think. And thank God it does. It's strange looking back now, how something that once terrified me became the very thing that set me free. Time has a way of rearranging pain. It turns fear into clarity, endings into thresholds. Months have passed since that day in the fortune teller's shop, or whatever it really was. Sometimes I still wonder if she was real. If I imagined her, conjured her out of some deep need for meaning. But then I remember the photo, the Polaroid she, or someone, left at my door. The way the shadows in that picture moved when I looked too long. And I know, she was real, and her warning was too. My life now looks nothing like it did before. I didn't go back to corporate work, didn't chase titles, deadlines, or approval. Instead, I built something smaller, quieter, a life that feels mine. I write full-time now, stories, essays, reflections about fate and the strange ways it whispers through our days. People read them. They reach out, share their own stories, their own warnings. It's humbling, really, to realize how many of us are walking through the same storms, pretending not to be soaked. Sometimes I'll get messages from readers saying things like, "Your story helped me trust my gut again," or "I saw your video, and I think I met my own Estelle." I used to be afraid of those words. Now I'm not, because maybe that's what this was all for. Not to scare me into silence, but to push me into speaking. The biggest shift, though, happened inside. Stopped trying to control everything. Stopped treating uncertainty like an enemy when things fall apart now, and they still do. I don't see disaster, I see an invitation. The warning taught me that fate isn't a straight line. It's a maze with mirrors, showing us pieces of who we are, one reflection at a time. And every so often, when I'm writing late at night, I'll catch a flicker in the corner of my eye. A silhouette, a glint of silver braid. No words, no voice, just presence, and it's enough. One evening, I visited the river again, the same spot where I'd seen her last. The air was cool, the sky bruised purple and gold. The city hummed quietly behind me, lights blinking on like scattered constellations. I stood by the railing and whispered, "I made it." The wind stirred. Somewhere downstream, a ripple moved against the current, and I could almost hear her laugh, soft, knowing, proud. The truth is, her prophecy didn't change my fate. It revealed it. Every choice I'd made, every fear I'd run from, was leading me to this exact place. A crossroads disguised as chaos, a loss that became an opening. I used to think destiny was something that happened to us, a script written before we even arrived. But now, I think destiny is a conversation. It whispers. We answer. It tests. We decide. It warns. And then waits to see what we'll do with the warning. If you're listening to this and wondering what to do with the strange, inexplicable moments in your own life, the coincidences that feel too sharp to ignore, the dreams that echo long after waking, the quiet voice that says, "Not this way," listen, not with fear, with attention, because sometimes the universe doesn't shout, it murmurs. And if you're too busy dismissing it, you miss the shift, the one thing that could have changed everything. Every so often, someone asks me, "Do you think we really have free will?" I never give a straight answer. How could I? All I know is this: we walk the paths we choose. But maybe, just maybe, those paths are offered to us for a reason. And somewhere out there, in a small room that smells of incense and rain, someone is still whispering warnings to the ones who are about to cross their own lines. Maybe she's still waiting. Maybe she's watching. Maybe she never really left. As I leave you with this, I'll say one last thing, because it's the lesson that saved me when everything else fell apart. Don't fear the warning. Fear the silence that comes when you ignore it. Sometimes the storm isn't sent to drown you. It's sent to wash away everything that isn't meant to stay. And when it does, you'll see yourself clearly for the first time. So that's how it happened. How one strange encounter, one warning from a woman I can't fully explain, shifted everything. I thought I knew about control, destiny, and truth. If this story found you tonight, maybe it wasn't by accident. Maybe it's your reminder to pause, to notice the patterns, the small signs you've been brushing off. Because here's the thing. Life doesn't always shout its lessons. Sometimes it whispers. And if you're quiet enough, you'll hear exactly what you need to. If this story stayed with you, even for a moment, let it. Share it with someone who needs a nudge to trust their intuition. And if you've ever had your own warning, your own impossible coincidence that changed your path, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments below. I read them all. Until next time, listen closely, choose truth over comfort, and remember, the storm isn't coming for you. It's coming for you to become. This was a fortune teller's warning, changed everything. I'm glad you were here to hear it.